I'm really pleased to be able to introduce the next session of the meeting, which is a chance for us to focus on one of our new areas of work. We're currently investigating with our partners Forestry England the feasibility of releasing beavers into the wild within Gloucestershire. We have 3 sets of speakers as part of our panel. We're very lucky to be joined by Matt Holden from the Devon Wildlife Trust, who will share their experiences in Devon. We've also got Sam Pegler from Forestry England, who will tell us about their vision and the work already going on in the Forest of Dean above Lydney, where beavers are helping to reduce flood risk. And then we'll hear from GWT's own Anna Tarbut and Dee Durham about our plans in Gloucestershire. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Matt.
Hi guys, can you hear me? Nodding heads, always a bit disconcerting. I think Liz was going to share a presentation, if that's all right, and then I'll just rattle through some slides as a bit of help. But yeah, welcome and thanks very much for having me this evening. My name is Matt Holden. I lead the Devon Beaver project. I've been in post since January 2022. I took over from Mark Elliott, some of whom you might be familiar with Mark. And I just wanted to provide a little insight into the Devon Beaver project, which is kind of had a fairly long-standing involvement with beavers in Devon. So on to the next slide, if that's okay, Liz. Or whoever's at the controls. So just to put this in context, obviously Devon, we're in southwest England, and we've kind of been working with beavers since 2010-11. 2011 was when beavers were first introduced to a fenced enclosure or enclosed beaver project in West Devon. On the Tamar catchment, 2 beavers were introduced and they've subsequently bred and done an awful lot of studying of that, which I'll talk to in a second. And then in 2013, wild living breeding beavers were discovered on the River Otter. The origins are still unknown as to that, but in 2015 we commenced the River Otter beaver trial with partners, which ran to 2020, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well before talking about where we're at today in Devon. So on to the next slide, if that's okay. So our enclosed beaver project was actually really all about managing culm grasslands and the mosaic of scrub and culm grasslands. And initially it was kind of thought to be quite an interesting experiment to reintroduce beavers to a 3-hectare fenced enclosure and to explore how they would do in managing this very wet, fairly inaccessible site, which was becoming heavily scrubbed over. And this just looks down this area on the site. And an awful lot of monitoring was established, a strong beginning of a very strong relationship with the University of Exeter to look at the hydrology, the ecology, the geomorphology of the site and the changes in vegetation as time went on. And there's a couple of publications now on our website available which review the changes in hydrology and also in the ecology of that site in the kind of 12 years that's now been running. But on the right there just shows some of the transformative changes which we saw on the site, which hadn't really been anticipated. I think there was the anticipation they would manage scrub, but not quite how extensive their dams would be. And across this small, relatively small section of stream, they built 13 plus dams. Those black lines represent dams and the grey areas behind them wetlands. And then the little lateral veins going off into the wetland are canals. And it's an incredible site now. It's been amazing to see the dynamic changes. We've seen significant reductions in flood peak flows moving through the sites and real changes in the ecology there as well. Just on to the next slide, if that's all right, Liz. And then in 2013, like I said, wild living and breeding beavers were discovered on the River Otter. There was a lot of discussion around where these beavers had come from, what kind of species they were they Eurasian beaver or the North American beaver, were they healthy, and what were we going to do with them? And there was kind of discussion at that time from DEFRA and Animal and Plant and Health Agency about removing those animals. And the community kind of really got behind that, especially around the village and towns of Ottery, St Mary, where they really loved their beavers. They kind of known they'd been there for a while, and they pushed back and they said, no, we want to keep our beavers here. And we came kind of stepping in at that point along with other partners and said, well, why don't we do a English beaver trial similar to the one that had run in Scotland from 2009 to 2014 in Knapdale? Why don't we explore how it is to have beavers back in the English landscape and a fairly intensively managed agricultural landscape and the impacts and the opportunities that come with that? So the beavers were trapped and health screened. They were Eurasian beavers, they were healthy, and they were re-released along with 4 further beavers to bolster the kind of genetic stock of that population. And we learned an awful lot through that time, which is summarised in the Science and Evidence Report published in partnership with a lot of other organisations that we worked with during the time, and the River Otter Beaver Management Strategy Framework, which was presented to DEFRA at the end of the trial, in which we said, look, this is how we'd set out about managing beavers beyond 2020. And I'm sure some of you will be very familiar with the announcement in 2020, which was on review of the evidence. The beavers could stay. They were given the stamp of approval, if you like, and they're now the only population which are formally authorised and recognised by government, unfortunately, in England. So other wild living beavers are across other parts of the country, but they are not authorised. They're kind of considered unofficial populations. But during the trial, we learned an awful lot about working alongside beavers and how they fitted within the community. On to the next slide, please. Yes. So I think it's just one thing I wanted to make, and a real highlight is just how well beavers do in our lowland England landscapes. We've got a mild climate, a lot of abundant forage for them, willow, poplar species, for example, and the population really has grown significantly in the time that they've been in the River Otter and during the trial. And these heat maps just show the extent of activity throughout the catchment during that time. We've gone from two territories in March 2015 through to 20, maybe 25 territories today in 2023. So we've got an awful lot more beavers, an awful lot more beaver wetlands, and some incredible habitats developing along the way. On to the next slide, please. So in Devon, and this is a bit of a messy map, but we've got beavers now really in nearly all of our all of our main catchment partnership areas in North Devon, East Devon, and in West Devon in the River Tamar. Don't have any in South Devon yet, but those blue highlighted areas showcase catchments in which beavers are present. They're on the Otter, they're on the River Exe now as well, in the Tor catchment in North Devon, and there's a strong population on the Tamar as well. And those pink catchments just show those which are hydrologically connected, and we'd expect to see beavers there in the near future. So we've got a lot more beavers. We're, I suppose, a stronghold for wild living beavers in England, and we do an awful lot of work with people in those catchments. Just on to the next slide. So today, really, our key areas of work, we still continue with a lot of education and awareness raising. That doesn't really go away as important. And as we try and embed beavers in different strategies and in different understanding around what they will and what they won't do, we continue to have conversations with the local communities. We do an awful lot of advice and guidance, and in some cases, practical management with land managers. And that's obviously changed somewhat in nature since beavers became legally protected last year, but we still continue to do that work. And we do a lot of research and monitoring, or support of research and monitoring, to plug gaps in which there's uncertainty, for example, around fisheries or around population dynamics and all those things. And one of the interesting and emerging areas, I think, for me, are understanding the ecosystem services and the benefits beavers can bring to nature and society. So I'll just finish on the next slide, really, around the project that we're working on at the moment with the University of Exeter, which is really looking at how we can maximise some of the benefits beavers bring and reduce some of those conflicts. And I think this is really exciting because I think we recognise there's a lot of challenges in our water environments. And if we just can make a little bit more space for our rivers and our streams, we can address an awful lot of those, whether that's natural flood management or water quality enhancement. And beavers can play a really critical role in those. And we kind of know where beavers are going to be active. We've got some really useful modelling tools from the University of Exeter that show us where beavers are likely to build dams and develop wetlands. And we can use those tools alongside other data to understand where beavers could be most beneficial in different catchments. So we kind of started this Making Space for Water programme. We really welcome any thoughts on that for people who are interested in finding out more. They can check out our website. So I think there's some real benefits that could come from this kind of making space approach to our rivers and riparian landscapes. And I'll finish there, if that's okay.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Matt. Thanks for really giving us a taster of what's been going on in Devon. There's a lot of really exciting work down there. And actually, I was down in the spring looking where some of that Making Space for Water work was really happening and talking to some of those landowners with you. So yeah, that was really, really good to see. And I think some really nice lessons for us to learn. And one of the great things about the Wildlife Trust is that ability for us to learn off each other. So that's Brilliant. So thank you very much. And if you stay on our call with us, and we'll come back to you as part of the panel in a moment. But right now, we're going to move on to Sam Pegler. Sam, are you ready to talk to us about the work that Forestry England are doing, please?
Yeah, of course. Thank you. So first of all, I'm Sam Pegler. I'm the Senior Ecologist for Forestry England, covering West District. I just want to sort of speak briefly about Forestry England's stance on beavers and what work we've been doing in West District and specifically Gloucestershire. Next slide, please. So Forestry England, we currently have our biodiversity business plan, and under that, beavers are a species of high priority for reintroduction. So alongside things like pine marten and white-tailed eagle, they're species which we're actively trying to reintroduce to the nation's forests, and we're quite keen to see them back. Forestry England is the largest land manager in England, and as part of that, we have wild and enclosed beavers across our estate. Next slide, please. So thinking about West, as you've already heard, Devon has quite a substantial wild population of beavers already, which means West has probably the largest known populations of wild beavers in England. We have various wild populations that interact with our woodlands. And we also have the Great Half Beaver enclosure in the Forest of Dean, which I'm sure quite a few of you have already been to at some point. So the Great Half Beaver enclosure was put in 2018, and one of its main aims was to investigate how beavers affect the flow of water. Next slide, please. So Great Half was first, the Great Half project was started back in 2018. It's had several different beaver pairs have gone through there. But the most recent beavers who've joined was a female who was put there in October last year. Quite pleased to say that that female has successfully bred with the male who was present already, and we've been able to confirm that there are now 2 kits there, which is excellent news for us. In terms of the beavers' effect in the area, they've turned what was quite a heavily incised woodland valley in the Forest of Dean to an area which is now full of beaver structures. The flow of water which goes through there has been significantly reduced. We've been working with the University of Exeter to study the hydrology of that valley. And over around sort of 270 storm events, we found that there was a peak reduction in flow of around 25%, which has definitely been of great help to the populations who live downstream, as that was previously quite a flashy watercourse, and there were issues of flooding downstream. Next slide, please. So thinking about the future, as you're all aware, we've joined a partnership with Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust to investigate the feasibility of wild beavers in Gloucestershire. And that's something which we're quite comfortable with as an organisation. There's definitely challenges that will come from that, but we've been speaking to colleagues in Germany and from around the country about how best to manage those potential conflicts. And in terms of our nation's forests, it's something that we'd really like to see to sort of bring back that well-functioning ecosystem and those wetland habitats. We are quite conscious that wild beavers across the country will take time, however. So where there are benefits to having enclosed beavers prior to us hopefully being allowed by DEFRA to investigate wild populations, we might move a bit sooner to have enclosed beavers in order to bring those benefits sooner rather than later. But talking of wild feasibility of beavers, I think it's Anna next to talk about that.
Thanks, Simon. Beautiful. Moving from one to the next. It's like you knew what my slide said. So hi everybody. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust's beaver feasibility, which we're obviously doing in partnership with Forestry England. So I'm going to keep it nice and brief, so we've got plenty of time for questions and answers. So please do send some in if you've got anything you want to ask any of the panelists. But the beaver feasibility, I guess, from Gloucestershire, from our point of view, it's really looking at the potential to release sustainable free living, so wild populations across Gloucestershire. And I think a key aspect of that for us is that sustainability factor. So I think with quite a lot of the different enclosures where they're sort of situated, if they were ever unenclosed, as a population, they're going to find it hard to link up. So it's looking at the existing habitats where we can do restoration, riparian restoration, so planting up river corridors so that populations can build up. And you've moved on to my next slide already, which was very good. So the feasibility itself, it's an 18-month project. It's going to focus on 3 main areas: biological, social and ecological feasibility. It tells you a little bit more about those on the slide itself, but it's basically trying to look at quite in depth about how beavers might impact both the local biodiversity, the local habitats that exist, and the local people and the infrastructure that exists. So we need to look at this really broadly, because there is concern out there about the release of beavers or wild beavers coming, and it's really important that we manage that and talk to people and understand people's concerns, where there could be potential areas of conflict, and that we're starting to have conversations about these types of things at a really early stage. So I think that's a key aspect for us. And I think something that we're really hoping to bring together as part of this feasibility project is a beaver stakeholder partnership, I think we're going to call it. But the aspect of that is really starting to talk to people, understand what they're going to need if we're going to have wild beaver here, which I think we will do at some point, whether we release them or not. How we're going to work towards a strategy for beaver management that works for everybody in Gloucestershire. So that's a real key aspect of the project. And I will have my next slide, please. Assuming there is one. So just a brief look at the project timeline. So it's 18 months, as I said, which isn't a massive amount of time. Gloucestershire is quite a big place, so we're going to be have to be quite focused about where we look for beaver release sites across Gloucestershire. There's a stakeholder analysis that I mentioned, so talking at a high level to lots of stakeholders out there to understand people's concerns. We're doing all those assessments I've talked about, so the biological and ecological assessments across Gloucestershire. And then long term, at the end of the project, we are looking to publish the feasibility study. We're hoping that we do come out with some sites that look possible for wild beaver releases. That's hopefully what we're going to see, but obviously we're not going into this making any assumptions about that at this point. It is going to be a true feasibility study, and if it shows that actually there isn't anywhere suitable in Gloucestershire, then that's what the feasibility study shows, although we certainly hope that's not the case. I do think it's just worth mentioning just briefly, just at the end of my slides, and then I'll promise to shut up. Obviously we're all probably aware that the government did make an announcement recently about species reintroductions not being a priority. And whilst we obviously are aware of that stance at the moment with the current government, she says, there, not that I'm going to say too much about politics, but I think for us, beavers really are a keystone species. So the way that they can engineer an ecosystem, I think, you know, it's much more than just releasing a species back into somewhere that they used to live. It's about those impacts that they can have, that natural flood management, that carbon sequestration potential, water quality, all of this sort of those additional ecosystem services that really make them much more important than just a release of a species. So I think the way we see it is that we've got this, we've got someone in post now who I'll introduce in a second, but we are going forward with this feasibility study on the basis that we think that there is a real need to do species reintroductions for species such as beaver. So I just thought it was worth mentioning that. And then lastly, before I introduce our beaver feasibility coordinator, I just wanted to say a quick thank you to anybody who is attending the AGM who gave money to our beaver appeal earlier this year. So we managed to exceed our target, and we wouldn't be doing this project without you. So just wanted to say a quick thank you to everybody. And then with no further ado, after promising not to speak very long, I'm going to introduce Dee Durham. So Dee joined us last week as our Beaver Feasibility Coordinator. It might be the week before, time has no meaning anymore. So I'm just going to introduce Dee and let her say a few words about herself and where she's come from.
Thanks, Anna. Hi, it's nice to be here. So yeah, I started in post a couple of weeks ago. As Anna said, I'm going to try not to repeat anything that Anna's said, but apologies if I do. So over the next 18 months, I'm going to be taking forward the feasibility work that she's just described. I'm new to Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust. Before I joined the team, I was looking after an enclosed beaver project in West Sussex, owned by the National Trust. So I've been lucky enough to see firsthand the incredible habitat creation that they're capable of. In the headwaters of the River Wey, which was on the border of Surrey and West Sussex, I watched just 2 beavers create over 12 big new ponds, mostly in the first year, and they turned a small stream and meadow into this really complex, really messy type of habitat that so much wildlife loves. So that was a really good experience, and I hope that will help help me going forward. So coming into this role, obviously I'll be focusing on the potential for wild beaver releases, and there's obviously a big difference between beavers behind a fence and beavers in the wild. Land use and pressures on land use have changed significantly since the last time beavers were here. So a lot of my work will be looking carefully on a local as well as a regional level at the potential for negative impacts of reintroducing beaver, and starting to think and talk about ways in which any potential future reintroduction could be the potential for negative impacts of reintroducing beaver, and starting to think about ways that any potential future reintroduction could be done in a way that minimises conflict with local communities and interests. I would really love to see beavers thriving across Britain again, and I'm sure many of you do too. So this is a really exciting opportunity to figure out whether it's feasible to bring them back to the rivers of Gloucestershire. It's early days of the project, but I'm really excited to get stuck in and see what's possible. So as Anna said, thank you very much to everyone who donated to the Beaver Appeal to get the ball rolling. I might not have been here without you guys, so thank you, and I look forward to sharing my progress.
That's brilliant. Thanks, everybody. So we have got some questions that have been coming in through the chat, so please do keep those coming in. But Matt, just a heads up, I think this first one's coming your way. We've had a couple of questions on water pollution, and a particular question around whether there's any evidence that sewage being discharged into rivers has been adversely affecting the beavers that you've got in Devon. So I wonder if maybe you might tackle that one, and then we might think about the water pollution question slightly more broadly.
Yep, thank you. Yeah, we've had that question a few times in Devon, and there's obviously an awful lot of pressure on the water industry at the moment. Generally, we've seen no evidence, not that it's been a strong area of research for us in this kind of emerging theme, but there's not any evidence that I've found about kind of direct impacts between sewage discharge and implications for beavers. Obviously, one of the interesting avenues for exploration in terms of beaver wetlands is that, similar to constructed wetlands, they can be really interesting habitats for kind of slowing the flow, drawing out nutrients like phosphate and nitrate, and creating this kind of real opportunity for vegetation to thrive and remove some of those kind of nutrient enriched kind of water or sediment from the watercourse. So not any evidence so far that there's kind of direct impact, but I don't know if there's research being conducted as we speak on that. Most of the water quality research being conducted in the southwest at the moment is focused more on the benefits that beavers are likely to bring to water quality downstream than on implications for the beavers themselves. If that answers that question.
Yeah, I think that's great. Did any of the other panelists have anything to say on that broader question of whether beavers were affected by sort of water pollution more generally? Just don't want to prevent anyone else if they've got a... No, that's great. Thank you, Matt. I think you've covered that one off, but I think you're right. I think it's that looking at the impacts that they can have on helping us clean up some of our water is a really good positive for beavers, and one of those ecosystem services that Anna was talking about earlier. Anna, there's a question for you in the chat as well. So it's sort of a heads up as I read it for you. you said that you'll have to be quite focused in where you're looking for potential sites. But as this is a feasibility study, you'll surely have to look quite broadly too. And the question posed is, how are you going to navigate this?
That's a very good question. Learning as we go is probably the answer. So we who are getting a massive plug today, so we should be charging them for that. So that basically looks at the habitats, where there's habitat suitability, so where there looks like suitable habitat for beavers and where they're most likely to create dams. So I think Matt's mentioned that already. So that's a good place to start in terms of where we want them to end up, or where they could probably provide those ecosystem services that we really want them to do in the landscape. So I think we'll definitely start looking at some of those areas. We're coming up with a methodology for carrying out those ecological and biological feasibility studies. And I think what we'll need to do is we'll use that at the broad sense to kind of then try and hone in on areas that we want to give more focus to. I think we are just really conscious that what we can't have Dee do, as much as we'd love to, is walk every catchment in all of Gloucestershire. It's just literally not feasible, probably on any time scale, but certainly not in 18 months. So we'll start off with that high level mapping we've had done and then ground truth it. So go out and actually see is the habitat what the mapping shows it is. It's based on open source data, and we all know that's only as good as the underlying data set. So going out there and looking at that and then using that to guide us. I think there's also quite well, not quite a lot, but there's various other studies going on around the county. So within the forest, Sam, just give you guys a peg here, but the Forest Waters Project, they've been doing quite a lot of work on natural flood management in the Forest of Dean on quite a lot of the catchments out there. Now they're carrying out catchment walkovers across quite a few of the catchments within the forest, and we've already had discussions with them about sharing the methodology so that they can do some of the work as well, which means obviously we'll be able to look at a much bigger area across the county. So I think it's being realistic, we won't be able to look at it. So yeah, mapping and then some ground truthing to sort of steer where we'll be looking at. Is that okay?
That's great. Yeah, that's brilliant. Thanks, Anna. We've got a couple of questions in around actually the work that's been going on north of Stroud. And Dee, I know that you're new to the area, but we've had humans going out and being human beavers and putting in natural flood management structures. And the question that's come in is, wouldn't it be better to use beavers for this purpose? I wonder if you'd be happy to talk a little bit about that, Dee.
Yeah, certainly. Well, I can tell you that I've built a few dams in my time, and none of them have ever been as good as a dam that a beaver can create. They're absolutely incredible at the work that they do, and they do it instinctively. And they just, yeah, I mean, this is one of the main reasons that we're looking to use beavers as this amazing habitat management tool, because they can do what we can only imitate for free.
That's great. Thanks, Dee. And well done on trying to be a beaver. But I think, yeah, let's see if we can get beavers doing in fact, what Sam has been seeing them do in the Forest of Dean, in that enclosure above Lydney, that 25% reduction in water flows at flood peak is a really good demonstration of their ability, isn't it? Sam, we do have a question in the chat around the stakeholders who might have concerns about the reintroduction. So I just wondered if you could just say a little bit about some of the concerned stakeholders that we'll be thinking about in the project.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's when we're bringing a species that can cause as much habitat change as beavers back into a landscape, there are going to be areas that beavers choose to create dams and choose to flood, which are not suitable. Whilst I can be quite happy thinking about some of our forests that I'd love to be turned into wet woodland and it'll be excellent, the farmer who lives just downstream, who has his his fields flooded, would not be as keen on the idea of having beavers there. There's also people who, have reasonable concerns where their houses are quite close to watercourses. There can also be things like, say, the angling clubs and fisheries, where there are concerns there around, say, how fish use the rivers. most of which there is a growing body of evidence to suggest that beavers are beneficial to fish stocks, but that is something which has to be investigated and treated seriously. But our experience from our colleagues in Germany is that beavers can be managed in a landscape. And so the stakeholders who have concerns, we're really quite hopeful that there will be solutions that we can bring to the table to control these potential issues.
Thanks, Sam. That's great. Matt, I wonder, could you just tell us a little bit about some of the mechanisms that you've had in place, just picking up from what Sam was saying there, where you have had to bring in some of these sort of devices and mechanisms for dealing with beavers, maybe creating dams where it hasn't been suitable in terms of public infrastructure?
Yes, I think what's been quite useful with the legal protection coming forward last year is that the government published fairly clear guidelines on the management of beavers, and we now work to a hierarchy that is similar to what was proposed at the end of the River Otter beaver trial. And that gives us a fairly clear, well, I'd say clear, I'd take fairly out of it, a clear framework in which to engage with land, water or forestry managers who are having concerns over beavers. And there are concerns, obviously, where beavers are perhaps building dams in places that those land managers would deem not appropriate. And we will support them with advice and guidance through that process. In the past, we've perhaps taken more of a management approach and engaged with that. So that goes right from, it depends where the concerns lie, but if it's tree protection, then there's relatively straightforward mitigation measures there, and it's really just popping some kind of twill mesh or weld mesh around the trees. It's just an adjustment of tree guards as I see it. And then there's more involved solutions like dam management, or in certain instances, but relatively few, really, things like flow devices. And they're mechanisms that are used in Europe, they're used in North America to manage beavers. And it's important to note, these are across Europe, people have been living with beavers for an awful lot longer than we have here. And reintroductions have started in Europe in the early 1900s. So in the UK, we're a long way behind. And as Sam says, there's a lot we can learn from what's been done and these established methods that are in Germany, in France, elsewhere as well, and in North America. So we kind of work through this hierarchy. Some of the interventions are fairly low-key, like tree protection. Some of them are more involved, like exclusion fencing or kind of moving to kind of dam removal. But I think more often and second on that hierarchy is making space. And it's starting to have conversations with land managers about can they make space? Because I think there's a recognition for a lot of people who've got low-lying fields that those fields are not going to be able to be managed, as they have been for the last 60 years, for the next 60 years. And I think they acknowledge that with climatic changes, farming that close and within the floodplain is unsustainable in some instances. So it's kind of having reasonable conversations about what the future brings and whether that land would be better served as a piece of nature conservation land or as a beaver wetland. So unfortunately, mechanisms and incentives are slim on the ground, but a lot of our conversations are veering towards, if there was an incentive there or a mechanism like countryside stewardship that was adaptable, would you be interested in making that space? So there's an awful lot of kind of tools in the toolkit, if you like, to manage some of these concerns.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Matt. And just to pick up on that sort of tools in the toolkit, we've had another question coming in around the reported issues in Scotland with beavers and the fact that that's actually resulted in some culling in that case. Obviously, everyone wants this project to succeed, but the question is, will this study, include looking at some of those measures that might be necessary? I'm going to look at Sam maybe for that one.
So in terms of so the government's proposed licensing hierarchy, as Matt was talking about, it does include the option of culling as a final sort of option when all other options have failed. However, it's worth pointing out that beavers are highly territorial animals, as again, I'm sure Matt has found on the otter, and culling has been found to not be a long-term solution. If you cull the beavers who are present in that area, who are causing a problem, that creates a vacuum which then draws in other beavers. Because as beavers are so territorial, they defend their areas. And once those beavers have been removed, others will come in. So instead of culling the beavers, it's been found much more efficient to install flow devices, dismantle dams where they're causing problems, install fencing, tree protection, all these things that Matt was talking about, and keep those beavers there, because as long as the problems that they're causing have been resolved, those beavers will prevent other beavers from coming in as well.
Thanks, Sam. So one of the other questions that's come in is around the other wildlife that's supported or not. So I wondered, Dee, whether you could tell us a little bit about some of the benefits or not of the beavers on other wildlife in the areas that they've been reintroduced.
Yeah, absolutely. So they're known as ecosystem engineers for a good reason, and their wetland creation provides habitat for a huge amount of other species, and pretty much anything you can think of is going to benefit from water, and therefore from the wetland type of habitat that beavers can create. Obviously, ponds are going to create habitat for fish. They can be spawning grounds. Lots of small mammals, otters, pretty much everything under the sun that you can think of. There's the one around the fish is that one is significant because a lot of people think that beavers do eat fish, but in fact they are herbivores, and so there are some issues around potential barriers for migration around dam creation. However, there's ongoing research on that, and for the moment, it looks as if the barriers created by the beavers are not actually sorry, forgive me, they're not creating too much of a barrier, and that many fish can actually migrate upstream without any issue. Invertebrates are another huge one. Dragonflies will massively benefit from the opening up of the tree canopy around ponds. So there's too many to note, but it is massive. It can cause an absolute explosion of wildlife. That's great. Yeah, it's really, really nice to hear that we think they're going to have that beneficial impact on lots of other species in the catchments that they end up in, and I'm sure that is what Matt's finding from the work they're doing down in Devon. Anna, I think the sort of next one probably for you is, the question is, if we get as far as a release and those beavers move from where they're first released, is that a problem, and how will we be looking to tackle that, or won't we?
Yeah, I mean, I would say first of all, a release is probably a little way away from where we are now. So I think after this feasibility, assuming it shows some hotspots, some areas we can do releases, we'd want to do another localized engagement before we even thought about that. So just to manage everyone's expectations on when we'll be showering beavers across Gloucestershire. But I think them moving is something we want to consider within the study. I mean, I think, as I mentioned, and everyone here will say much better than I will with their experience, but beavers won't modify habitat if they don't have to, and if there's a nice area that they can move to quite easily, which already gives them the habitat needs that they want, why would they go and make dams? So that's something that we're looking at as part of the study, and whether or not we can do sort of a sub-catchment release, which might be multiple beaver pairs or beaver families within a catchment, to try and push them into territories that, as Sam said, they're very territorial. So you'll have probably the dominant pair will establish the nice easy territory, and the others may then be pushed up into those areas where we're going to see them starting to create dams and getting them more of those ecosystem services. So we are very conscious of the fact that, yes, if we put some wild beavers somewhere. They may well not stay there. They're wild by default. So when do animals ever do what you want them to do? So that's going to be looked at, and then looking at holding capacities of breaches, trying to think about how we can help steer them to where we want them to go, and equally maybe away from areas we don't.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Anna. And unfortunately, that does bring us to time. So my final job is to say thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you so much for giving us your expertise in those brilliant presentations, and for taking all of those questions from our audience. It was obviously a topic that really engaged our members. They were really up for asking some questions of you. So I hope that wasn't too tough. And the last thing for me to do is just to hand back to David. David, over to you.
Thank you, Emma, and thank you for a very stimulating discussion there. Thanks to all the staff, fellow board members and guests, and our new president for this AGM. But really, thank you, our members, for attending this evening and for your continuing support of the Trust.